would love to introduce my amazing panelists. So I'm just going to go around and Anne, since you have your microphone off, can you introduce yourself and just share in what way you are a stakeholder and how you are involved in autism research, please?
Okay, this is one area I didn't prep in. My name is Dr. Anne Grego-Nago. I'm autistic. I'm also a human factors engineer, so I come out of the world of applied research and applied science. And currently I work for Autism Speaks and as a human factors engineer there, um, working on the science team. So thank you.
And Zach, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Williams. I am also autistic. And yeah, currently I am a first year resident and a research track, a psychiatry residency at UCLA.
Hari, can you introduce yourself and share how you are a stakeholder and how you're involved in research?
Hi everyone, I'm Hari Srinivasan. I wear multiple stakeholder hats. I'm a PhD candidate in neuroscience at Vanderbilt University, where I research sensory systems in autism. I'm also in varying roles in a bunch of other research projects. I've also had the diagnosis of autism and ADHD since age 3, and recently diagnosis around movement. My flavor of autism impacts me on the communication and sensory motor fronts, so I bring multiple perspectives, scientific, advocacy, and lived perspectives to the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hari. And Denai.
My name's Denai Fannin, and I'm an associate professor at North Carolina Central University. And I'm a speech pathologist. I train future speech language pathologists. I also adjunct in Duke's Head and Neck Surgery and Communication Sciences Department and collaborate with the Duke Center for Autism and Brain Development. And so my research focuses on early identification of child language delay or disorders and bias mitigation in clinical settings once people are identified as autistic, and then access to care for people who've experienced right hemisphere stroke. They tend to have pragmatic language disorders, which is relevant to some of the autistic traits that we see as well. Most importantly, I'm a parent of two autistic children, ages 14 and 15, one of whom has intellectual disability. So that really grounds my approach to research and that's my stakeholder role on this panel.
Thank you guys all so much. I'm so excited. So we're going to get started with our first question. And if it's okay with everybody, I'll just go in that same order to make it easy because that's how you're on my screen. So the first question is, how has your lived experience as an autistic person, a parent of autistic children, or both, shaped the questions that you ask in your own research or the way that you review other people's research? So we'll start with Anne.
Because of my autism, I do read from a script on these stuff. So in my job, I'm not a creator of research, but I'm a consumer of research. And I'm in the unique position to recognize research that may improve the lives of autistics and their families. My autistic experience includes speech and social challenges, sensory issues, trauma, and GI problems. And I use my lived experience to understand and empathize with other autistics, their caregivers, and parents. And I'm also looking for for ideas to improve my own life. Okay? I'm very much a systems thinker, and my brain enjoys when solutions combine research from different areas. And I'm going to give you an example of how this happens in autism. Eating disorders, especially anorexia, are a major cause for long-term hospitalization for autistic women. And eating disorder clinicians found that about 20% of those in anorexia treatment have autism. Traditionally, anorexic treatments aren't as effective for those with autism. And like autism, anorexia has a genetic component, and researchers have found a genetic overlap between the two conditions. Neuroscientists have discovered how the brains of girls with autism respond to food sensitivities different from autistic boys, and that this brain activity may lead girls to develop strategies as children that are deadly as adults. And all this information or all this evidence has been used to develop treatments tailored for the autistic brain. And in Great Britain, the success of these tailored programs have decreased the time of inpatient care by 6 weeks. Okay. I've just given you examples that come from genetics, neuroscience, clinical work, implementation science research. Rarely do the results of one particular field of research improve our lives, but it's when all the research streams come together that we see improvements for our quality of life. And part of my job is to help to advocate for those combinations, to take the research from the researcher and implement it into clinical and life improvements. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Anne. All right, Zach, we'll go to you next.
Sure. So I would say, much like Anne, my lived experience very much shapes the research I do, and several of my identities, not just as an autistic person, but also as a medical provider and a participant in other biomedical research, all greatly shape the questions I ask in research and the research that I review as well. I mean, primarily as an autistic person, though, I would say that I care that all the research I do is something that other autistic people find meaningful, which generally boils down to the fact that the work is more applied and close to having a tangible impact on the lives of other autistic people. If you go and zoom out and ask autistic people, what matters to you in research, they're saying, we want answers, we want things that are going to be helpful for us now, near translation. And I think that generally, is what I tend to research, something that is going to be well received thing within the autism community. And as a medical provider, I often tend to find just medical and psychiatric settings top of mind. This is where I am all day in the hospital. And so the studies that I'm most interested in conducting are those that make changes to the way autistic people receive healthcare in those settings. And then I've also had the opportunity to be a research participant in all kinds of studies, not just autism research studies, which I do a lot of, but also, interestingly enough, several like clinical trials that were not at all related to autism, like being in the Moderna COVID vaccine trial, for instance. And being a study participant has mostly given me a front row seat to how not to run a study in a lot of cases. But being a study participant is also great to learn all the little tips and tricks of what other people are doing well and how to make studies maximally participant friendly, which half of which is just giving people snacks, breaks, and good directions. But I mean, there are other little things too that do very much help.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zach. Hari.
There is a thunderstorm going on in Nashville. It's really loud, so I'm hoping everyone can still hear me. Back to the question. Strength-wise, I bring persistence, creativity, curiosity, and the ability to bridge academic research, lived experience, and policy. The challenge is balancing being both subject and researcher, staying objective while acknowledging my own vulnerabilities. Given my own communication and sensory motor challenges, I'm acutely aware of the gaps created when research only samples the easiest to test participants. As a result, a big chunk is getting left out of solutions that come from research. It's kind of like designing a remote using athletes, then wondering why the folks with motor challenges struggle with it. But if you designed that same remote for the motor challenges folks, it would easily work for athletes. That's the mindset I bring to my work. Broad inclusion so science represents the full autism spectrum, not just the most convenient slice. So solutions coming from research benefit all. As a graduate student, my academic research focuses on areas that align with my research lab. But beyond that, I try to contribute in small ways to nudge other areas forward, like on collaborative projects, on advisory boards, nonprofit boards, by writing. Coming to the second part of the question, how I evaluate other research. Bottom line for me is translational value. There were approximately 11,000 papers on autism published last year. We are drowning in research papers, but how many actually added to improving autistic lives? In peer reviews, I'm also seeing a tendency to rebrand old ideas with clever new labels. I'm increasingly seeing terms like kinder, gentler, or neurodiversity affirming attached to almost every study, which seem more marketing lingo than meaningful innovation. Substance must come before style or volume. A lot of research also sits in theory, which is nice at an intellectual level, but autistics need solutions. And too often, research takes forever to make it out of theory. CBT, for example, has been around since the 1980s, but took decades to make it out as a real-world practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hari. And we could not hear the thunder, so all was well. Denai.
My experience as a parent shapes my questions because I'm always thinking about the practical outcomes and real world accessibility, quality of life. And all of this can be done with basic science. I review a lot of journal articles and trying to pull that out of the authors, I think is really important because as a parent of autistic children, I read a lot of articles and I'm like, I know what you're getting at is important, but who cares? you know? I don't right now until you tell me. And of course, I will give them the language, to make it so that we will care, people at, consumers of their science. So I'm really, uh, involved in definitely trying to make or help science, basic science matter or be useful for people, and not just amongst the, thousands of articles that Hari talked about. Um, so uh, having that lived experience of wanting to improve the lives of my children is uh that plus working in research allows me to see the nuances and systemic gaps um um, it, it, when I'm trying to balance, my lived experience, advocacy for autistic people with objectivity, it can sometimes be tricky. Um, but and in those cases, I'm always trying to check for my unconscious bias, and navigate, what I think is really important when these research methods or research findings and or policy progress is really slow. Um, but it's I think I'm definitely invested in continuing research with human participants and um, across, with the more challenging to collect as far as data is concerned populations, ones with intellectual disability, ones with communication disorders, ones who have who are non-speaking. They're been excluded from research studies. Black people have been excluded from research studies as well, and I'm Black, so that lived experience helps gives me a different perspective as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Denai. All those answers were so insightful, and I'm going to reach out to all of you for some ideas about how to move things forward. Our next question is, how do you think current autism research priorities align or fail to align with the needs identified by autistic people and their families? And we'll start again with you, Anne.
First off, I'm going to, on this question, let me explain my terminology. When I say the autistic community here, I am including autistics and their families and caregivers because I'm going to talk about other communities too. So that's the reason why I'm doing that here. Um, this group, the group of the autistic community, their priority is quality of life in all dimensions of life and accessibility. And autism researchers' priorities vary. Clinical and applied researchers, which include your medical and your treatment providers, are pretty closely aligned with the autistic community. Okay. The autism science community, which often includes geneticists, neuroscientists, and now data scientists, they are judged on generalizable results, the impact the whole community. So they're looking for something that links me to a 5-year-old kid. Okay. And our situations might be very different, but they're looking for the thing that runs through both of us often. This group is measured by publications, grants, and intellectual property created. And the quality of life issues may not be very important to them. Or they might be very important to them. Okay. But it's not always but those aren't gonna get them tenure or a big grant. Okay. For many basic researchers, the quality of life issues just aren't visible to them. The further a researcher gets away from working directly with autistics and their families, the less they may understand the priorities of that community. And I review a lot of grant applications. That's primarily what I do for various agencies. And reading these applications can be really depressing because the goals of certain fields is to find something wrong. And their solutions are never solutions that are going to help me. Their solutions are to create more research. Now, when I ask for examples of research that doesn't align with our priorities, I'm usually given social and psychology research that uses college students as subjects, okay? And please remember that most of that research that involves college students is often self-funded research from graduate students or junior faculty at universities without a large autism research infrastructure. And using this subject, using college students and covering is usually very affordable research for these people trying to get their degrees. We need this research not necessarily to improve our lives, but to help train students to become researchers and clinicians. Okay. And I often hear the complaint that research is not improving our lives, and that is understandable. But you also have to understand, too, that there's another community, and between the researchers and the autistic community sits the autism treatment practitioners. And we do have some amazing research that's come out in the past 30 years. But if treatment centers are unwilling to adopt the newest evidence-based practices, that research can never really improve an autistic's quality of life. Now, I am hopeful because I'm seeing research impacting treatment in Europe and Australia and Canada and even Africa. So we're beginning to see it being done regularly in other countries. So in other countries, they often discuss autism using the Autism Plus model, where they take co-occurring conditions. They do not lump co-occurring conditions into the definition of autism. So it would be autism plus GI issues, autism plus intellectual disability, autism plus anxiety. And by that way, by also looking at that way, hopefully we will not have as many people left out of research by actually focusing on what we're doing. And this has really allowed communities to go beyond causation and blame and more toward accessibility, better treatments, and especially pain relief, especially if you know kids who have GI issues. A lot of that's pain relief. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. Zach.
Yeah, I mean, this is fairly similar to Anne's response, frankly, but yeah, as I mentioned previously, I mean, autistic people are most interested in research that results in near-term benefit. And again, this is improved supports or services or improvements in quality of life for autistic people who are alive today. And so this is mean a focus on studies that are assessing interventions, not necessarily interventions for autism, but interventions for the things that autistic people want intervened on. Things like GI issues, things like their ADHD, things like anxiety, anything that would be a measurable improvement in quality of life if it were intervened upon. But of course, we don't have lots of these interventions. I mean, there are probably like 3 trials out there for medications to improve ADHD in autism, for instance. But again, we want the resources to have more trials for these things. And of course, are the funds being diverted to that? No, not really. And again, we have much of the money in autism research spent on, uh, you know, other fields. We have some things like health services research and epidemiology that can also affect clinical practice in other more indirect ways. That's great. But even more of that is spent on things like clinical translational neuroscience research, descriptive clinical association studies, genomics, animal models, multi-omic group discrimination, some of this data science stuff, deep phenotyping. All of this provides, less value from a community standpoint. It's not to say it's bad research per se, but if we want money going to making autistic people's lives better, then this just may not be the right way to do it. And especially if it's a zero-sum game, which it is because funding just, can't be spent in 2 places at once.
So true. Thank you, Zach. Hari.
Autism research needs progress on many fronts. And when I say many, I mean it's vast. We need work on communication, sensory processing, and executive functioning, on brain and body domains such as mental health and co-occurring conditions, on biomedical areas like pharmaceuticals and underlying health physiology, on lived support needs including education, employment, and daily care, on systemic influences such as policy and participation, and on technology, from assistive tools to artificial intelligence, yet priorities seems conflicting of this range. Social research gives the illusion of underplaying the importance of biomedical advances, while biomedical research seems to remain stuck in theory or animal models, with no clear path to real human health outcomes. Meanwhile, we spend too much time debating which autism subgroup is growing fastest, who deserves attention and resources, whose voice is loudest, and which treatment can best monetize disability. And we get stories of extremes. Superpower ignores the harsh realities of the most impacted. Total deficit and misery sees no path to solutions, and segregation often becomes the easy answer, an echo of the ugly laws. When disabled people were not allowed in public so society didn't have to confront its failures, a 19-year-old is treated like a 91-year-old, boxed up in a care facility till they die. In the meantime, we add confusion by introducing new diagnostic terms every decade, as if reclassification alone could solve those issues. Motion is not movement, but both strengths and challenges can coexist. We must support autistic strengths by opening more doors of opportunities. But we must also find real solutions to the challenges of the more impacted so that they too can approach those doors of opportunity instead of being always locked out. Yes, ideally we need the competing groups to acknowledge their interdependence and work together rather than treating their goals as competing priorities. That day will come. But what we forget is that collaboration and shared responsibility within the autistic community itself can move the whole field forward. Many autistics are in positions of privilege and power in higher education, in research, and in policy. They are in a unique position, with real insights, to help build solutions that reach those with greater challenges, and those challenges often span both social and medical fronts. Progress for some must and can become progress for all autistics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ari. Danae.
Yeah, everyone said a lot of what I would have said, and I wish that there was um, uh, two things could be true at the same time. So we do need the the basic science, but and it shouldn't be that something is prioritized at the detriment of this, quality of life, um, you know, supports for daily living type research, but we know that's not how the funding dollars work necessarily. Um, but I think across medicine, I mean, I would like to see considerations for autistic people um, integrated into these studies. In a class that I took last semester on implementation science. We were talking about advances in blood pressure medication, and the professor asked what types of questions should researchers be addressing at the implementation level. And I said a question would be for those patients with ARFID, so the avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, or people who physically can't swallow the pills. So as speech pathologists, we work with dysphagia. So that's a swallowing disorder that you could get for many reasons, but a lot of time it's dementia, degenerative diseases, but also, your child with ARFID who will not take pills. What alternate methods of medication delivery are there? Is there an injection, a patch? And my professor said of all his years of teaching, no one had ever brought that up. And I was really surprised about that. But, that's because they have had one speech pathologist in the class. But that's the whole purpose of these interdisciplinary teams, right? And perspectives from stakeholders, people on the research teams who are autistic and think about um, things that parents like me think about every time we go to the doctor. Is she even going to be able to take the medicine? Um, so, I think across all of the co-occurring conditions that can happen with autism, it would be nice if medical providers and researchers were thinking about that as well.
Thank you so much, Danae. That's so true. All righty. Our next question is, what are some best practices or tools that you wished more autism researchers employed in their research. So, like recommendations for increasing stakeholder involvement without increasing undue burden, making changes to measurements, things like that. And we'll start with Anne. Thank you.
I'm probably not the best to start with right now because I'm also going to ask the researchers to do things. So one of the best practices would be to use autistic and family participation in the development of the research question. Okay. If we can start at the origin of the research project, we can actually address a lot of the needs of the autistic and family communities. And research is rarely viewed as a partnership between the researcher and the autistic family and communities. And when it is considered a partnership, it really strengthens the research and also makes it a lot easier on that implementation side and on the innovation adoption side. Okay. So, but we also desperately need right now from researchers is their expertise to call out bad research and misinformation. And researchers actually do this every day in seminars, but they don't do it necessarily in the bigger audience. They're very polite and very congenial. But we really need the research community to stand up to good science, and especially in like their research journals. So I work a lot in advocacy, and so I am addressing these questions daily. Unfortunately, there are a lot of bad actors who are promoting science, treatments, and technology that are not evidence-based, and the evidence is weak, the science may be non-existent, and the funding is very self-serving. And this is the community that's sort of referred to as the autism grifter community. And this group preys on the hopes, the desperations, and the confusion of families by promoting services and treatments that don't work or that promote bad science. And rarely do I really see people standing up to say, yeah, no, that doesn't work. And then why? And this is where the researchers also could help a lot. They really need to get better at communicating the technical aspects of their methods and the science they use. They need to be able to monitor and call out bad researchers by making it clear what are good standards. And we really need to be willing to discuss research that parents find on the internet and explain it. Okay. Autism research is very complicated and it is highly technical. And autistics and their parents and their families should not be expected to have to master all the science. So I am currently watching as research is being used to attack the community, both the autistic community, the parent communities. And researchers should have been fighting against this, against bad science and questionable long before now, and been fighting not just in their own academic communities. They do it in the academic communities, but they don't do it further out. But they really do need to communicate with the communities and advocate for better funding for things. I never saw, whenever I would go and I would stand with families to advocate for funding for research, rarely did we have researchers there. Okay. Someone just mentioned about the priorities of funding. I'm going to be honest, I sit on a number of we have no clue what the priorities for funding research are right now. It is a very chaotic world and the funding aspects. So, but if researchers can do anything right now, it is to learn to communicate better. I have autism and it is considered a communication disorder. But a funny thing, when I'm with a lot of researchers, I'm rarely the worst communicator in the room. Okay? So thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And Zach.
Sure, and to follow that up, I think that I want to double down on researchers should communicate better. This time, though, to their participants. Really, one of the things that I think that researchers could do, the best is that they need to make the research study on the whole more accessible. Cognitively accessible to their participants, their potential participants, their past participants. It will pay off to make people understand what you are doing, why you are doing it, and when you are going to be doing it. And so, that mostly means understanding what you are putting forth in your printed and, spoken materials, and then how to, understand what people are and aren't getting from that. How I usually, what I usually find most helpful is actually to explain more. You oftentimes, as the researcher who has, spent all of your time and effort on this study, just know so much more about this study than everyone around you that things are implicit, that like, oh yeah, this is what happens next. This is where you go. This is what you do. And of course, people are coming into the study not knowing any of that. So I am an over explainer, but I found that usually, autistic or not, the participants tend to find excessive directions helpful. And you don't always need to give everyone excessive directions. But my strategy tends to be provide excessive directions optionally. Here are the directions. Then if you need more directions, click here, and then there's the excessive directions behind a little like click here for more. And that has been so helpful in my general experience because people just don't get lost as much. They don't ask me for more. They don't get confused. I mean, not that this never happens, but it just does generally make people find that they understand what I'm doing. I get thanked for my emails, which is shocking, right? But then it does make people feel like they are really in control of what they are doing, where they are going, and breed less confusion, which just makes people happier about doing the study in general. One of those things that I did actually learn from being a participant, funnily enough.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Zach. Ari.
The last question was the big picture. The first step is shifting from a mindset of how do we study autism to how do we make studying autism possible for everyone. This question immediately makes us think participatory research must be the solution. But we need to be honest about who is actually able to participate. Many high support autistics were never given early access to alternative communication methodologies or technologies aligned with their motor, health, and sensory profiles. In many cases, what was tried early on was incompatible with their apraxia or sensory challenges, so it failed, and the assumption became that communication itself wasn't possible, which means they literally can't take part in research as a child, as a teen, as an adult, or even when they are 80 years old. And this is a third to quarter of the autistic population we are talking about. So instead of apologizing for excluding them, let's first invest in solutions that make participation possible, both long-term and immediate. In the long term, ensure access at every age to communication that works for them, understanding that it's never too late and you're never too old to learn to communicate. That way they get to not only participate in research, but also in life broadly. The immediate adaptation is making today's research protocols flexible enough so people can participate now. We can adapt equipment, simplify task demands, develop adaptive protocols, rethink research environments, building from the participant's comfort zone, and measuring what the person can give you, not what the paradigm demands. In my research, accessibility was the design principle, not an afterthought. My VR-based sensory integration task is simple and intuitive by design. It can be used across the lifespan and accommodates a range of communication, motor, and cognitive differences. It relies on movement and feedback rather than long verbal instructions or button presses to measure perception and chiming. The goal isn't to dumb down the science, it's to open the door wider so more people can be part of it. And it still yields robust data. My task may still not capture the entire spectrum, but it significantly broadens participation, so I think of it as a good start. Another area we need to rethink is exclusion criteria. When I first entered graduate school and began reading papers, I was shocked by how many studies excluded participants for co-occurring conditions, medications, and more, creating an artificial, pure autism sample that hardly exists in real life. What Anne mentioned about Autism Plus really intrigued me. I need to read up on that. Ultimately, research inclusion isn't just about recruitment, it's about design. The future of autism research depends on building tools, environments, and expectations that fit real people, not the other way around. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ari. Denai.
Um, One suggestion I would have as far as a best practice for including stakeholders, the fair compensation issue. And so that means if everyone has the same role in a study, like a community engagement committee, the compensation should be the same, not like, for example, paying a PhD researcher $500 an hour, while the representative of the autistic community gets 25. We've really seen this in grant applications, and it's up to the reviewers of these grant applications to alert the applicant to this discrepancy. If they're all there to be a part of the research team doing the same task, there should be a going rate for that. And, people shouldn't be paid more just because they have a PhD, to do the same thing. As far as I think, the measures, of course, should be culturally responsive and relevant, and you get that information from your stakeholder participants. I know of researchers who are working on survey question types that are more effective in getting answers from neurodivergent people. I think it's important to always remember and respect different perspectives within the autistic community. I was on a neurodiversity affirming committee run by autistic people, and they set ground rules the first day saying that we're not going to quibble over language, meaning that they won't let the debate of identity first versus person first language derail the goals of the group. Several social justice movements have been destroyed because of infighting about minutia like that. And language is very important. I'm not saying that's not important, but I tell my students, we have clients who want to use identity first, clients who want to use person first. I personally use identity first for my children, but I'm not going to tell, a family, no, you need to be using identity first language, so as not to alienate stakeholders in your research. I think we need to truly listen to everyone that we invite to participate and realize that, even though there may be a study that says the vast majority of autistic people think this, that's I want to see who's interviewed the vast majority of autistic people, because that's a lot of people. And I know how research works and sample sizes and how things can generalize. But when we're talking about things, you know, in such a wide range of um, presentations and life experiences, I think it's difficult to put everyone in the same box. So, when we have these autistic people, family members on the same research team, we should expect different perspectives and make sure that we're respecting everyone.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Denai. And then, kind of building off of this theme, actually, how can researchers develop trust with autistic participants and their caregivers? And
I'm just going to go through a few things that researchers might need to do. Researchers really need to listen to autistics, their parents, and their caregivers, and be respectful of how that person wants to communicate, and don't rush their communication. Okay. That's really important, taking the time and just to listen. It is not easy as a skill to develop sometimes, but it's very important. Researchers need to understand that the experiences of an autistic person and their caregivers, their parenting, is always changing with cultural, societal systems and diagnostic changes. Okay. Researchers need to identify their biases and understand how much the field has changed in the past year or the past 30 years. I am floored and shocked, and I very much grade down when I see a grant application that is quoting a lot of research from the early 2000s, before 2013, when we changed the diagnostic code of autism. Okay. Because it shows me they can't define what population necessarily. So things like that, we have to adapt to what the current times are and and understand how much the field has changed. one thing that I'm seeing a lot lately, I hadn't seen for a while, but I'm saying researchers need to never blame a parent or even hint that autism is somehow a parent's fault. I thought we had moved past this, but the past year I'm seeing a lot more of this, and it's very scary. And it's also very sad because we had moved past the refrigerator mom period. And so to move back into it is very sad for our community. And then one thing that if any of you have sat on a committee with me and we've come across a grant application like this, you know I will get going on it. So I'm going to try to limit my words here. But researchers need to never suggest research on an autistic child that would not be done on a non-autistic child due to safety concerns. This happens more than you would expect, especially regarding technology and wellness treatments. And it is often framed that the condition of the child with autism is so bad that it is okay to understate the negative effects of the treatment. I can go on for this for a good hour. I know Kim has seen me do that. So I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Zach.
Sure. This goes in a little bit of a different direction, but I think, for developing trust with autistic participants and their caregivers, I would hope that for a lot of researchers, there are actually people right in their vicinity that might be able to help them do that. So by this I mean they can leverage their academic and community partnerships. Most researchers are part of academic institutions that already do things related to autism. And this means they might have an autism clinic, they might have an IDDRC USAID LEND program, these sorts of like disability related kind of institutional government funded programs. And maybe the researchers are or aren't hooked into those programs. But I think what they should do is lean into those affiliations or partnerships and figure out to what extent they can actually, become, members of those things, associated with those things, or just talk to the people who are running those things and get, endorsements from them, get understanding of who those people's community partners are. Talk to those people, get understanding of what those community partners priorities are, get endorsements from those community partners. And, if there is some sort of conflict there, understand why. Because of course, in that case, then there may be some reason why the research that this person is doing is not up to par. Right. And you don't need to just get the trust because you're getting the trust. You need to get the trust because you're, walking the walk. And at that point, then there is some actual improvement to be done.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Zach. Hari.
I feel trust starts with respect, respecting communication differences, being transparent about study goals, and sharing results back in accessible formats. But it doesn't end there. Trust isn't a checkbox. It's a relationship built on understanding, accountability, and responsiveness. Let's take Einstein's ladder of participation as a mental model. At the lowest rungs are tokenism, where autistic people are technically included, but have little real influence. It's like being asked to be on an advisory board to give your input, but then just ignoring that input. True trust comes at the top runs, where their input helps shape the research questions and they become co-creators, not reviewers at the end. It also means sharing findings in clear, usable ways. But trust also depends on what we choose to study and how we study it. Autism research has fragmented camps, the two visible ones being medical versus social, and each camp seems to view the other with suspicion. The truth is, autistic people's needs cross all of these boundaries. Many researchers end up being wishy-washy, as they don't want to offend either camp, which actually reduces trust further, from both autistic people and from families. People want researchers who can bridge perspectives with conviction, not avoid them out of fear. Building trust means having the courage to work across interests and center what truly matters to autistic individuals and their families, even if it doesn't fit neatly into one camp. Finally, trust grows when researchers meet people where they are, in schools, clinics, community spaces, or online, showing that participation is built around their realities, not academic convenience. Trust doesn't come from neutrality, It comes from integrity, from choosing relevance over rhetoric, and continuing to show up even when the conversations are hard. Thank you.
Thank you, Hari. Denai.
I, I think that uh, treating the stakeholders as colleagues is really important on the research team, and I mentioned that before as far as the fair compensation, right? Equal pay for equal work, but not just compensation, just listening to what they're saying and considering it, valuing it the same way we value all of the team members. Um, Following through on the promises that, that will give feedback or results, I think is really important. And, just as far as if you have the luxury of having a research team, making sure that they are reflective of your participants. If you're going to be, looking for, bilinguals, right? Um, Bilingual, Urdu speakers, you should have someone on your research team who speaks Urdu. You should have people who are from the community on your research team, because that's who they'll be interacting with, and you can do that with your the research assistants you hire to work, the students, right? Finding students who are also autistic to work on your research team to help with data collection, and to help with dissemination, to help with reviewing your grants before you send the applications in. I think there's, you can build trust with the community just by if someone walks in and realizes, oh, there are autistic people who work on this study. I think that is really powerful.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Denai. All right, and we're to our last question. So, in the last few minutes of our panel, what advice would you give to autistic individuals or to parents or caregivers of autistic children or autistic individuals who are curious about pursuing careers in autism research or are interested in contributing in any way to shaping the future of the field? Anne.
Okay, I'm going to discuss an area of research, the research area that is not always discussed. So my colleagues will probably discuss. But one way to participate in research is to become a strong community reviewer for grants. Okay, for grants and different policy programs. And this requires a person to develop a deep understanding of all of the spectrum and all of the different needs, or to at least empathize with them to try to understand it. It also requires an understanding of the research and the people in it. I also encourage parents before they want to, if they want to get involved in research, to read research on subjects that interest you. The one thing about autism research, it spans a wide variety. Okay. If you find an article that interests you and it's behind a paywall, write the author. They will often send you a copy. Okay. I strongly encourage people interested in research on parents and families and to read Neurotribes. It's an older book, but it will give you an understanding of autism research. Because as Hari mentioned earlier, a lot of old ideas are being repackaged with new marketing terms. Okay. Find research that you like and look at a variety of subjects. I regularly read research by the other panelists. Okay. You'll find great researchers in a variety of fields, including not just in neuroscience and genetics, but also in disability studies and education, sociology. And there are also some wonderful clinical studies out there. Okay. There are often very specific, research is often done in very specific areas that are not related to autism at all. The researchers might study the intersection of autism in their fields, such as criminal justice researchers studying police interactions and autistic citizens. I know that this is done in San Diego, and I've been following the Blue Envelope program for a number of years now because that's an example of a program that came from police and local communities more than it came from the autism research community. So, if you can find one area that really interests you, follow it. I recently sat on an expert panel regarding neurodiverse conditions and school architecture. Okay. There were people from around the world practicing in such areas as heating and cooling systems in autism and playground designs in autism. And these folks had done the research. They were producing research in their own everyday world. I mean, when you talk to someone who can tell you the difference between the volume tones of air conditioning switch-on systems, okay, he wasn't a researcher in the scientific thing. He was a systems engineer, okay, but he was able to do the research in that field. So if you do that kind of research too, expect to meet people from around the world. So if being if being a community reviewer is of interest to you, please email me because I can put you. I work for Autism Speaks, and we do keep a list of community reviewers that we give to other organizations when they call saying we need a reviewer for this or we need a reviewer on this pre-doctoral program. So please feel free to let me to do that. So thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Anna. That's such a cool panel you have in our work group. Zach.
So I think one thing I will do is just very briefly kind of overview a couple of different models of like what it means to, I guess, contribute to the autism field, because there are different career paths in here, right? One is just being a career autism researcher, which I think would really be like getting a graduate degree in some sort of scientific field, probably a PhD, and that would be a kind of a fully committed path after, undergrad, going to maybe a 2 or 3 year post-bac and then into graduate school into, some sort of field that's, adjacent to autism, training with somebody who is themselves an autism researcher, maybe doing a postdoc, getting a faculty job. And so that's a career path that a lot of autism researchers are on. And if you are really interested in making your whole career about autism, then that's probably the path you should take. But of course, there are, lots of people who may not be, that committed to, making their whole career about autism, but still want to contribute, and that's totally fine. You can also do things like becoming a grant reviewer in autism spaces, or becoming a some sort of community partner in other respects. Being a part of research teams, sharing one's lived experience, and being a sort of part-time on that, or sometimes even full-time on the research team, depending on your actual position, but not necessarily requiring a PhD to do that, because you're contributing in a different way. I think these latter positions are a lot harder to come by, mostly because the credential you have is your lived experience and usually who you know. But I do think that it's relevant to just say that these are, again, different paths. But I think the thing to know about that latter thing is, how to get that is oftentimes, again, about networking and contacting typically faculty in your local area, or someone that you know for some other reason in your network, with interest and enthusiasm, saying like, here I am, here's what I am interested in, this is my background, my lived experience, and why I want to be a part of your project. And that can work. I also would recommend, for anyone who is trying to get their way into a project based on, lived experience, etc. I would say that the more of a pre-existing relationship you have with the person that you're contacting, the better. So I would, if there is research to participate in at that center, participate in it. If you are a patient of that clinic, etc., that seems good. And then you are not only just cold emailing, but you are saying, as a person who has experience in, this capacity already, and now I'm already trying to, I guess, level up my participation and now become, representative of the patients of this clinic or the research participants, and be a community partner with you. And that might be helpful. But beyond that, I would also recommend that if you are trying to be someone who is being involved in autism research, not just as a primary researcher, but a community partner, you can do this at, not just your local site, but any site. I think it's important to know that you can, reach out to people who are doing work that you are interested in and may have, uh, I guess, credentials in that are, that you have things beyond your autism or stakeholder status to be to have an advantage in, and that will also get you involved. Perhaps people obviously like you to be involved. For oh my god, like this person has some reason that they would be an asset to the team, and so clearly people bring people on for that for other reasons and other jobs. And just so remember this, these are also jobs.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Zach. Hari.
My advice is to remember that change doesn't happen all at once. I often describe it as dropping pebbles in a pond of change. Each small pebble, whether joining a community board, giving feedback on study design, or pursuing a research career, creates ripples. Our collective ripples build on one another and, over time, reshape the field. So don't underestimate small steps. They matter. Second, don't just fight for a seat at the existing table. Redefine what the table looks like. That means challenging who gets to be there, how decisions are made, and what counts as expertise. Lived experience isn't an add-on. It's essential to asking better questions and producing more meaningful science. Remember, college is not the only path. Whichever path you take, know that it won't always be smooth. For me, college was infinitely more accommodating than the school system, but that was my experience. And college is more than exams or checklists of accommodations. Who you are surrounded by, professors, peers, or mentors, can make all the difference. In graduate school, where you work closely with your advisor and lab, that people part becomes even more critical. When you find environments willing to adapt and people who see your potential, the journey becomes not just possible, but meaningful. Your perspective, whether as an autistic, a parent, ally, or an advocate, has the power to shift research toward what truly matters for the community. Each pebble makes a ripple, and together those ripples can move the field forward. Thank you.
Oh, that's such a lovely metaphor, Hari. Thank you so much. Denai.
Um, Similar to the path that Zach described of, becoming a PhD level researcher, there are other positions like some places call them clinical research coordinators, CRCs, that require maybe an associate's degree. Some of them require a bachelor's, but they're researchers. Some people do that as a full-time job, while some do use that as a stepping stone on their path to, further doctoral work or between their bachelor's degree and before medical school. But it is a full-time job for researchers. And then that there are also these types of clinical research positions in industry. So for for pharmaceutical companies, for example. I mean, that's not really pertinent to autism necessarily. Usually they're doing cancer trials, but there are companies devoted to conducting clinical research. And therefore, they have positions for people who may not want to be in academia. And they may be conducting trial studies for autism. And, I also think just emailing people, after, as Anne said, reading articles, if there's a study you're interested in, just emailing faculty members, it actually helps. I've made connections by just emailing people. I think a lot of, or maybe I've just been lucky that everyone's been nice and receptive. But it doesn't hurt to email someone your interest and ask, do you have any positions, or, do you need someone to help you, to be a consultant on your study, or, community engagement board. I mean, you used to be able to say call someone, but email is probably a more effective way of getting a hold of people.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Denai. And thank everybody for this amazing panel. I've learned so much, and I'm just so grateful to know all of you.